If you want to learn how to plan your academic career in the field of primatology, stay with me. Hello and welcome to howtobecomeaprofessor.com, the web show to learn from proven professors and experts. I'm your host Stefan, and today you will learn how Richard Wrangham, British primatologist and Ruth Moore Professor of Biological Anthropology at Harvard, would plan his career in the field of primatology today. Richard is co-director of the Kibale Chimpanzee Project, the long-term study of the Kanyawera chimpanzees in Kibale National Park, Uganda. His research culminates in the study of human evolution, in which he draws conclusions based on the behavioral ecology of apes. As a graduate student, Wrangham studied under Robert Hinde and Jane Goodall. He's a co-author of the book Demonic Males, Apes, and the Origins of Human Violence with Dale Patterson, and along with Elo Rodriguez, Wrangham helped to introduce the concept of zoopharmacognosy, a concept that refers to the process by which non-human animals self-medicate. All right, Richard, thank you very much for taking your time for this interview.
You're welcome.
I believe that you just come back from a field trip from Uganda. So could you please, as a soft starter for our interview, tell us what you did there?
Oh, I was there for about 2 weeks, and I have a research team who are in the field every day. So what I was doing was going and encouraging them, finding out how things are going, and making sure that the standards that we need in terms of observation of the primates, the chimpanzees, are being maintained. And then, of course, I love being with the chimps myself, so I want to go out every day and simply catch up with the ongoing stories about what the chimpanzees are doing. And then the particular study that I'm involved with, when I get the chance to spend some time with the chimpanzees, is object play. And every day I was happy to be able to, or almost every day I was there, I was happy to see the chimpanzees playing with objects in rather unusual ways.
Right. Okay. That sounds very interesting. And how did you get into the field, into the academic field, primatology in the first place?
Well, I'm a biologist in training, so I studied zoology at Oxford University as an undergraduate, and I wasn't particularly interested in primates. In fact, I had no experience. But by the time I graduated, I'd already done field work in 3 different places, in Zambia and 2 in Kenya, taking expeditions while I was an undergraduate and even before I went to university. And I mention this because it reflects the fact that I had just a tremendous amount of interest in the behavior of wild animals. I studied some antelope and some moles, and I had all sorts of interest in just understanding what it is about the way that animals live that is responsible for differences in their social relationships. And after I graduated, I had the opportunity, suggested to me by someone at Oxford, to write to Jane Goodall and say, would she like to have somebody come and assist her in her observations? And she said yes. I was very lucky that it was a good time in her career. And so that set me to study chimpanzees. And within about 20 minutes of seeing chimpanzees in the wild, you realize that you're dealing with a species that is different from most other animals because they're thinking. The way they use their eyes, the way they are behaving, shows that they have a level of cognition that is elevated compared to many different species of animals. And then that just becomes really fascinating. You've got this bridge between other animals and humans. And so it's such a privilege to be able to work with a species like this that is clearly very threatened by threats to its existence in the wild, growing agriculture, logging, disease, and so on. And it's only going to be probably a few decades that people are going to be able to describe this. Well, here we are, humans on Earth, with a close relative that tells you something about where we came from. So how could you resist just wanting to spend all your time studying them?
Right. Wow, that's very inspiring. No, you are one of the leading figures in your field, and you are professor of biological anthropology at Harvard. And how would you? I mean, your career already has been lasting 40 years. You told me before, and how would you plan your academic career from a bachelor to professorship today? And if it's possible, please try to be as specific as possible.
Well, the first thing I would say is that academic life in this area, and probably in many areas, is not easy. It's very competitive. Funding is not that easy to find if you want to combine a research career with teaching. And particularly as a graduate student, there are all sorts of uncertainties about whether or not you will find the right sort of project that will enable you to develop a finished product. And the reason I say that is because if, as a young scientist, you are at all uncertain about whether or not you want to do this, you should not do it. The motivation has to come from within, because you're just so fascinated that you're completely mad that you have to do this. And if you do that, then you will have the level of excitement and motivation to carry you through. So that's the first thing. Don't do it unless you just have to do it. Now, when you're planning a career on that basis, then I think that nowadays you need to think of the fact that most research is done in teams, and the teams involve multiple specialities. But it is nevertheless vital that you, as a budding scientist, not only have your own specialization, but are well capable of understanding the specializations of people whose work you will use as a collaborator, even though you will not develop it yourself. So, for instance, almost everybody nowadays needs to understand some genetics, because very likely at some point you will need to take access to genetic data, and you need to be able to critique it yourself. So I think the way to do it, graduate school, is to learn a couple of techniques that you will have, that you can use in your laboratory, that you can develop in your own laboratory and be on the cutting edge. But then you also have to have an ability to understand the language of other techniques as well. So you're a primatologist. Most primatologists work in captivity, or maybe half work in captivity, half work in the wild. Either way, there are some things like endocrinology, understanding their hormones, which you can get at without invasive procedures. You don't have to inject them. You don't have to take tissue samples. You can get them from urine or feces. The same now, non-invasively, you can get access to genetics. You can learn something about how to do analyses of their movements using force plates. You can do some anatomical analyses. You need to take 2 or 3 of these techniques and really get to understand them very well. And one of them, in the end, will be what you will base your laboratory on, where you can train your undergraduates themselves. That's what you need in a career. You need to be able to train other people. And then meanwhile, of course, you've got to have just a fascinating problem that will lure you along. And that's going to be something that you can't orchestrate quite so easily. But the way you can, I think, develop the kind of scientific hypothesis testing approach that will be most attractive to the universities that are going to hire you, and the granting bodies that are going to give you money, is to find someone to work with who is doing what you think is really interesting stuff. Don't do it just because they are working on a species that other people haven't worked on. Do it because the problem is fascinating, and then they will help you, hopefully, guide you towards other equally fascinating problems.
All right, let's break it down to wrap it up. So, really, to get started, if you decide to start an academic career, you really have to be motivated intrinsically, right? The
Yeah,
drive must come from within.
exactly.
And in terms of developing your skill set, you said you must be aware of the um, yeah, different academic cultures from other collaborators, other academic fields, and at least become proficient in one, right? Very, very
Proficient in one and knowledgeable about others.
right. I understand. I understand. I mean, in your case, you studied zoology, right? And would be biology also a potential major for becoming a primatologist?
Yes, for a primatologist, you could take classes in biology, zoology, psychology, or biological anthropology. All of those are good as an undergraduate. But it's when you go into graduate school that you start your professional development, and that's when you want to make sure that you have some some really specialized knowledge of some cutting edge technique.
I understand. And let's move on to the second part of our interview. It's called selection, what I call selection. What are the most important milestones along the road to professorship? I'm talking in particular of the most relevant conferences to attend, and which journals shall young academics aspire to submit their original research work? And could you break down this for each stage of the career?
Well, as an undergraduate,
Right.
you don't have to worry too much about those things, but undergraduates who succeed in doing a senior honors thesis and publishing it are obviously getting a running jump. And that publication could be in a primatological journal like International Journal of Primatology.
And
So if they can do that, that's wonderful.
and that's also a realistic goal for an undergraduate thesis.
Yes, it's not common, and of course, by the time you're applying to graduate school, it may not actually be published because it's probably being written and submitted about that time. But it's a reasonable goal.
I see. Okay.
So, so then the student finds a professor and gets help from the professor, and then they'll probably write that paper together. As a PhD student, I think a really good goal is to aim for something like a paper published every year, so that by the time you've come to the end of your typically 6-year career, you've got 5 or 6 papers, either published or ready to go. Some people don't have any. Some people have more than that. But
Right.
if you can get 5 or 6, you're doing really well.
And which are the most relevant journals to really to aim for, to focus on?
So for the starting student, then journals that specialize in primatology are good ones to go for. These are like the American Journal of Primatology, International Journal of Primatology, Folia Primatologica, Primates, those things. But the more ambitious students will then go for papers that can be published in journals that are outside primates. So if you're interested in hormones, it might be hormones and behavior. If you're interested in behavior, it might be behavioral ecology, and so on. And then the really exciting aim is to get a paper in one of the journals that are relatively short and communicate to a lot of people. Things like the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, or Science, or Nature. And only very few will have the luck of getting a paper that is sufficiently high impact to get into one of those journals. But it's a great aim to have. Now then, you've got your PhD, you're going to become a postdoc probably for a year or two, and after that you hope to become an assistant professor. And you've got maybe 6 or 8 years as an assistant professor in order to develop your body of work to get tenure. And then you want to be publishing something like 4 papers a year, and again you want to go for the higher impact journals if possible. I think it's still true that if you have a paper in Science or Nature, that almost gets you a job.
Mm-hmm. I understand.
You know, it's that important. And if you have, by the time you're going up for tenure, something like 6 or 8 years after you become an assistant professor, if you've got your 20 to 30 papers at that time, then you've got a very good chance of being a respected member of the profession who will get tenure.
All right. So the aim number, so to speak, in order to get tenure when you reach your 40s or something, is to accumulate 30 papers, 30 articles. Is that right? Can you break?
Yes, I think that's a reasonable sort of aim,
I understand.
and it's a relatively high aim. Now, of course, I'm not wanting to suggest that it's simply the number of papers that's important.
Of course not.
Obviously, their quality is very important, but it gives you an idea of the rate of consistent effort that is needed to be able to be a competitive professional.
I understand. All right. Okay, thank you very much. You covered the journals very nicely. Thank you so much for that. What about the conferences?
Well, in primatology, there is a big meeting of the primatologists every 2 years, which is the International Primatological Congress. And that happens roughly in Europe or America every 2 years, every 4 years, and then in the off 4 years, somewhere else in the world, like Brazil or Indonesia or Vietnam is going to be the next one. And those are very good to go to. There are something between 500 and 1,200 people go to those. So there's a lot of networking possible. Mm-hmm. For Americans, there is every year the American Society of Primatologists. There are various European meetings. So these are very good meetings to go to meet all sorts of people in your field. But then, in addition, for the ambitious primatologist, there is no question. It is very good to go to a meeting that includes primates but is not restricted to them. Mm-hmm. So if you're interested in primate evolution, you might want to go to the Society for Vertebrate Paleontology. If you are interested in behavior, you go to the animal behavior meetings, and so on. So it's very good to go to something that embraces all mammals or all vertebrates, because there what you see is the development of techniques that haven't necessarily been applied yet to primates. And as a budding professional, you can say, aha, look what they did with those lizards. Mm-hmm. I bet I could modify that technique and do it with my primates.
Right.
So it's an opportunity for you to develop new ideas and bring them into the field.
I understand. How many conferences would you attend per year? And would you advise young scholars to present each time they're attending a conference a new topic, a new presentation, a new paper, or shall they try to get feedback for one topic in various conferences?
I tend to suggest just one conference a year and try and present something at it. And that gives you a bit of focus. Okay. You're busy during your graduate career and as an assistant professor. You've got a lot of responsibilities, and if you go to too many conferences, you do less writing. So I think people are best advised to be relatively selective. Mm-hmm. And use the conferences not as a distraction from writing, but as a platform to get something written. And remember that every conference you go to, when you submit your abstract and give your paper, there's a lot of work that simply goes into doing those things. And so I would only go to as many conferences as you can capitalize on them by letting them lead to publications.
Okay, I understand. So one conference a year is a good number for, I mean,
Some people might say more, but I mean,
Right.
again, you've got to find the funding to go to the conferences, and
Yeah.
that again, applying for the funding takes time.
Right.
So if you can go to two, then fair enough. But avoid the temptation to simply go to lots and lots of conferences and allow that to interfere with your onward progress.
Okay, I understand. All right, let's move on to the third and last part of our interview. It's called stakes. Yeah, and how did you maintain, or how have you been maintaining a very high level of motivation and discipline throughout your 40-decade-long career?
Well, I think that like most people who maintain their motivation, it's just the luck of being in an area that one finds completely fascinating. There's very little problem with it. The problem is that life is too short, and the number of problems that are intriguing and exciting are too many. So I suppose if there is any kind of guidance I would offer, it would be to remain open to new problems. In my own case, I was very much a primatologist, and then I started thinking about the significance of cooking for the adaptation to the diet, and this led me into a new area that in my 50s, I guess, or 40s, became a wholly new area. And thanks to having wonderful graduate students who sort of showed me the way, we developed in my lab a completely new area of being able to investigate with rodent models what was happening when we cook food in terms of the physiology of digestion. Well, my student Rachel Carmody led the way on that, but it enables exciting new questions to be available, and I think that's what you see in my colleagues, that if they stick very narrowly with what they always have done, then life will not be quite as exciting and motivating as if they open themselves up to new possibilities.
All right, okay, let's wrap it up a little bit. So we covered today 3 broad areas. The first one is called deconstruction. Richard explained step by step how he would plan his career in the field of primatology today. Second, selection. Richard shared with us what are, in his opinion, the most relevant journals and conferences. And number 3, stakes. Yeah, as you said, it's very easy. If you're very fascinated about your topic, it's kind of easy, and yeah, you have the inner desire to conduct your research. Professor Richard Wrangham, thank you very much for contributing so much value to the online school for unconventional academics, and yeah, we learned so much very specific and practical stuff from you, and I'm sure many of our users will put your recommendations into good use. And as always, I'd like to end each of my interviews with following quote: "The best advice is worth nothing if it's not put into practice." So thank you very much.
Thanks, Stefan.